Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, for this week's BA's baseball recap. So this week we are going to focus just on our offseason grades. I think that's going to be long enough as it is. Also, this week on Wednesday, we're going to be recording a live session of the Red Couch. I have special guest Rich with me as well. We're going to break down our predictions. So we got team records, who wins the division, who wins playoffs. We're also going to select our MVPs, Cy Youngs, Rookie of the Years, and break down some other stuffs as well. So that'll be on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, live on my Twitch channel. So we'll do it there instead of here. But today, yes, we're just going to break down the offseason grades, the acquisitions, trade, signings from each team. So the best way to explain this is for these offseason grades, we're obviously going to do A, B, C, D, F. The best way to explain what these grades mean instead of just throwing them out on a whim is A signifies they added and greatly improved the team. A B grading means that they've slightly improved the team. A C grade means that they basically filled the holes, but they're basically about the same team as they were in 24. A grade D means that they brought in less talent that they lost. And an F grade basically means that they did nothing, sat out the offseason, or are not trying to improve their team. So we're gonna start off with the AL East. So the first team up is the Baltimore Orioles. I went ahead and gave them a grade C. They lost Burns, they lost Santander, so they lost some key players. They did make some additions, but they kind of did more of a depth play. You know, they got O'Neill, Morton, Gibson, Sagano, Kittredge. So they added some arms, but they weren't top of the rotation arms that Baltimore probably needs. So losing Burns kind of hurts. The Tampa Bay Rays, I'm giving them a B+. One of the weakest positions that they had on the team last year was a catcher, and they did add Danny Jensen. Another player that they added that I think is going to improve them is they added Kim at shortstop. Now, he's going to probably start the year on the IL due to his injuries, but he's going to improve their defense and their offense at the shortstop position, which kind of lacked last year. And then staying on the Rays stuff, they did also recently, within the last couple of weeks, pick up the extension or the option years of Diaz. So that was a nice move. He was kind of one of those players, along with Lau, that were kind of on the cusp of possibly being traded this year if they don't want to decide to pick up their options. So it was nice to see that they picked up his options. But the rest of the Rays system and the way that they run their team, they always try to build from within, and they do have a top farm system. So I gave them a B+. Now, the Blue Jays, I gave a B as well. Now, they struck out on Soto, but they did add players like Scherzer. They're going to move Jeff Hoffman from a reliever to a starter. They traded for Andres Jimenez that was on the Guardians, so their defense at second base should vastly be improved. There's kind of a lot of question marks with how these players are going to bounce back or fit in with the Blue Jays. Obviously, Scherzer's dealing with age, Hoffman going from a bullpen role into a starter. So there's kind of a lot of question marks here with the Blue Jays. They did also add Santander. But with their structure, is he going to end up just being a full-time DH? We'll see what happens because he's kind of limited defensively in the outfield. The New York Yankees, I went ahead and gave them a C+. Now, they actually had a pretty active offseason, and they made a lot of additions and subtractions kind of. Losing Soto is definitely going to hurt them, and that's kind of the major part of this equation. The injury bugs have really hit them hard. So losing Cole, Gill's going to be out for a couple of months. Schmidt's also going to start the year on the IL, so that really hurts. Them not trading Stroman is actually going to help them. Them signing Fried is going to be huge for them. Picking up players like Goldschmidt, maybe he can bounce back. Maybe he could still be a contributor, but he's still kind of like replacing like a Rizzo type of spot. They also got Bellinger. They traded for Devin Williams as well, so adding pieces here and there. But they lost a lot of pieces as well. So they kind of are rolling the dice on some in-house players. So if Dominguez can be something in left field, great. But I mean, their infield is not really that scary offensively. The last team in the AL East, the Boston Red Sox. So I went ahead and gave them an A. They're one of the few A's that I actually have this season. So went out and traded for Garrett Crochet. They also picked up Walker Buehler, which was one of my favorite signings of the year. They also picked up Pablo Sandoval, which while he's going to start the year injured and he's still kind of recovering, it's one of those really cheap first-year options, and then maybe some more money on the second year. Then later in the offseason, they also picked up Bregman, so that's a huge pickup. Yes, they lost Pivetta. They lost some bullpen arms, but they kind of just rotated that stuff around. They also lost Tyler O'Neill. But with the system that they have right now, and they basically have 3 prospects that are kind of I think top 20 in MLB right now, and they're all kind of flirting with the big leagues. You kind of want to have some spots open for them. So I gave the Red Sox an A. All right, on to the AL Central. So the Minnesota Twins, I went and gave a C minus. They just seem to be in love with being mediocre, I guess. Like, I don't know if being mediocre is their motto or what, but they never can seem to have all their players healthy at the same time or clicking at the same time. So I went ahead and gave them a C minus. They lost a little bit, add a little bit, nothing really changed. The Detroit Tigers, I went ahead and gave them a B plus. Now, they didn't lose anything, but they did go out and add Jack Flaherty back, added Alex Cobb. They just recently picked up Jose Igurity. I always say his name wrong, but the guy on the Astros. I believe he's not going to be healthy to start the season, but again, that's a nice little depth piece for their rotation. They also added some veterans to their bullpen and Brebbia. They also added Conley, and then they added some extra offense with Gleyber Torres. So I think they've improved their team. They're still trying to give some of the young guys opportunities to start and make the lineup. I also think Gleyber Torres is going to do a lot better for this squad after leaving New York. So added some nice additions, added some nice players, and they're also leaving spots open for the young players that are developing. I like what the Tigers are doing here. The Cleveland Guardians, I went ahead and gave them a C minus. Now, they basically just kind of moved arms around and made a couple of trades. So moving on from Jimenez was, they have some infield prospects that they can kind of give that role to. So they could afford to lose him. That's fine. Losing Josh Naylor, though, I feel like it's really going to hurt their offense. Like, I love me some Carlos Santana, which they picked up to replace him, but I don't think he's going to provide the amount of thump and power that Naylor has. So it's kind of, we'll see what happens with the Guardians. They always seem to overperform what their roster looks like on paper, but I'm going ahead and giving them a C minus. So the Chicago White Sox, I actually gave a C plus, but this is kind of a hard one to define because they got Moncada's money off the books. They let Soroka walk, which wasn't anything crazy. They did trade away their best player, their best pitcher, and Garrett Crochet to the Red Sox. But I think they actually got pretty good value back in return for him. Their top two guys, I believe, was Teal and somebody else. But then one of the third players might actually end up being their opening day shortstop, which I will break down more on Wednesday because he's on my prospect list. Again, they're kind of one of those, they're not trying to compete right now. So they're kind of like signed players to fill in roles while their younger players develop in their system. And to be fair, the White Sox actually do have a really good farm system. So I can see what they're doing here. It's not anything to be excited about, but these are like off-season grades. They're not roster build grades. Kansas City Royals, I went ahead and gave them a B+. It might not seem like they did a lot, but I think they actually improved their team quite a bit. They could afford to move on from some pitchers. They had some of their starters that were returning, like Kyle Wright. I think Bubik, I think they also want to put in the rotation, which he's not anything sexy, but they could afford to move Singer and get Indy in return because their offense needs kind of a facelift. So put Indy in that leadoff spot in front of Bobby Witt Jr. I think that's a nice addition. They just recently traded for Mark Canha. He's going to fill in at first base more than likely after the injury. So they added some like veteran depth, and then they made some moves that improved their bullpen as well by signing Carlos Estevez. I think a sneaky signing that people are not thinking about is they signed Michael Lorenzen, but his agent this offseason had basically said that Lorenzen wants to go back to getting time in the field so he can be deemed that two-way player, which would then, after this season, give him more value as a player because of that role or whatever. It helps with the roster building. It gives you more of an option because you're only allowed 13 and 13. He is kind of a good athlete. If he played, I think mostly when he played in the outfield, it was center field. So I think he'll get some reps out there. We'll see what he can do offensively. But he's a nice little depth arm as well that can either slide in the rotation or more than likely the bullpen if they're going to use him out in the outfield as well. Astros, I went ahead and gave them a D. So when you lose Alex Bregman, you lose Kyle Tucker. All right, they lost Bregman. They traded Tucker. They traded Ryan Presley. They also lost Verlander free agency. Kikuchi, who they traded for, so it was like a half-season addition. Lost him as well. Yes, they kind of pivoted and got Christian Walker in free agency. And then in the Kyle Tucker trade, they did get Paredes from the Cubs, which I think Paredes in that ballpark is going to be phenomenal. When you start like weighing the pros and cons or the ways, it just felt like their team's worse off than it was. I do like the addition of the trade with the Cubs that they got Cam Smith. I can't confirm it. My Astros friend said that Cam Smith is actually going to make the roster, which If so, that's crazy. I think he'll be the first one from the draft class last year to make it to the big leagues, if that's true. But he's a stud. I think he's actually, in the long term, his performance is going to outweigh Paredes, but we'll see. I'm still giving the Astros a D. I think they'll still compete and be a solid team, but I feel like they swung and missed on a couple of players. The Rangers, I'm giving them a B minus. So they lost a lot of bullpen arms, and they kind of replaced them with depth, but they're probably not as good as the players they left, like Leclerc, Kirby Yates, that sort of thing. David Robertson is still out there as a free agent. Didn't really make any major splashes in free agency. A lot of money came off the books. I did love the addition of Jock Peterson. And I know this doesn't sound like a B minus, but I really hope that DeGrom bounces back, and they had Kumar Rocker and Leiter that are kind of sitting there as well. So they re-signed Eovaldi as well, which is huge for their starting rotation. I think they improved, but that's kind of why they're kind of like a C plus B minus. Seattle Mariners, I'm giving you guys an F. I think they're the only team that I actually gave an F, and I didn't give the Cardinals, and I'll explain why. But I just don't get it. I don't know what you're doing. You didn't really do anything. I get you have a top farm system, but like most of those players are like 19, 20, 21. They're still a couple years away, like 2 to 3 years away. You have this top starting rotation, and you just continue to refuse to give any offense or add anything offensively. I know even today they cut Mitch Haniger, so I don't know if they're going to call somebody up. I don't know what they're doing, but I think they have one of the worst offenses, and they did absolutely nothing to improve it. So I went ahead and gave them an F. Angels, I went ahead and gave a C. So they didn't really lose anything that was like they couldn't afford to lose. They added Kikuchi, they added Kenley Jensen, so starting rotation, bullpen. I like the additions of Travis d'Arnaud from that was on the Braves. Yo Makata, they're taking a flyer on. We'll see how he does this year, and if he doesn't, if he continues to struggle, they'll probably cut him and then call up Christian Moore to take over at second base or third base, wherever they want to put Renfroe at. My call right now is that I think Christian Moore is going to be up by the All-Star break, but they basically filled holes. I think they made minor improvements, but Angels are still going to be the Angels. Athletics. Now, it pains me to say this, but I'm actually going to give them an A minus because I hate everything that their owner has done, and I can basically explain why they made the moves that they made, but they did bring in Severino. They did bring in Springs, so they added two starting rotations, two players that are going to slide into their starting rotation, which is a huge upgrade. They also added Leclerc to their bullpen. Then they added some veteran depth as well as with Urshela. And then they made 2 extension offers to 2 of the players on their team, which were more team friendly. So they signed players, they made trades, they made extensions to the players they already have. Kind of a complete offseason. And I mean, I get why they're doing it because they moved out of the large market that was the San Francisco, Oakland area. And they're no longer going to get that big. Like, they're basically out of the nest of big market money sharing. So in order for them to continue to get revenue sharing, they have to spend a certain amount of money, and they're not quite there yet. They're about to be there, and they'll probably will get there by next year. But if they don't hit that threshold, they will lose their extra $50 million or whatever that they earn in revenue sharing. The Atlanta Braves, so I gave them a D plus. I kind of understand where they're at. They didn't really make any major signings. They did pick up Profar. They lost Morton, Fried, Minter, Travis d'Arnaud. But I kind of get it because their team's pretty locked up and pretty set. And I mean, last year they had a lot of freakishly bad injuries. Like, not freakishly bad. They had a freakish amount of injuries last year that most of them are going to returning. I don't think Strider's going to be back by opening day, but he'll be back as well. So it makes sense that they kind of stood pat and were like, let's just wait and see once all the guys come back healthy. But regardless, this is an off-season thing. I gave them a D plus. All right, the Phillies. I gave them a C plus because I really thought they were going to do something big this offseason, and they kind of just replaced what they lost. So it's kind of status quo other than like the Jesus Luzardo trade, which, I mean, starting pitching was already kind of a strength, so it wasn't a move that they had to make, but it was a nice addition. That's kind of gives them the plus and not just a C. So they added Jordan Romano and Joe Ross, but that kind of just replaces losing Estevez and Hoffman. And then they lost Austin Hayes, but they picked up Kepler. And then I guess in a sense, Luzardo kind of fills in for Spencer Turnbull, but it's just a major upgrade. But that's why it's kind of they just filled in the holes that they had. So that's kind of why I'm giving them a C plus. The New York Mets. So what would you guys give the New York Mets? But I'm giving them a B plus. There's a lot of moves here. They lost like their arms again, kind of rotating and stuff like that. I don't know if they actually are gonna have like the top end starting rotation that you want going into the playoffs. But you add arguably the biggest game changer in the batter's box in Juan Soto, so that helps. I also brought back Alonso for first base. To me, I feel like they're a trade or two away from being considered an A though, because by bringing back Alonso, you then have Vientos who basically has to either DH or go to third. So then you have players like Beatty, Mauricio, Acuna, that are kind of like blocked now, and you don't really have a spot for him unless you're waiting for an injury. Unfortunately, McNeil kind of got hurt, so that opened up one spot at second base, but you have a lot of these guys that are kind of like stuck there and pooling in AAA that you're kind of either stunting their growth. So you kind of need to make a move. So maybe you move one of these guys for like a better starting pitcher. And if you don't, then I feel like their top pitching prospect in Sprout, however you say his name, he's going to get a chance this year. I'm a fan of his. I want to see what he can do, but I don't know what the Mets' plans are right now because they kind of have a lot of like 3s and 4s in their rotation. Miami Marlins. So I went ahead and gave them a D minus because the Marlins are just one of those frustrating organizations that you don't really know what they're doing other than it seems like they're completely resetting from what the Derek Jeter era was in place. So they trade away Luzardo for prospects. Okay. They trade away Berger for, I think, a couple of small prospects as well. Okay. Adding more prospects. I think the belief is that most people think Sandy Alcantara is going to be moved, even though he is on a team-friendly deal. But the thing about that is they're also kind of, I think, below a certain threshold to also get the revenue sharing money. So if they're going to trade Sandy, that's going to put them even farther away from that threshold and losing $50 million. Like, I don't think the Marlins really know what they're doing at this point. So off-season grades, D minus. Washington Nationals. I gave them a C, but to me, on the frustration scale, they're probably a B plus. I thought this was going to be the year that they would be aggressive and start to make some moves. I think Rizzo even said in an interview, like, hey, we've done the developing. We're ready to start building again. And then they did nothing. No major signings, no nothing like that. They just kind of added here and there. I think they made one trade and got Lau from the Rangers. But that didn't really do anything. So, really, I mean, if you're looking at the roster, at least you get a full year of Dylan Cruz and James Woods out in the outfield. So that's something to get excited about. But didn't really do anything. Didn't really lose anything, but didn't really add anything. So it's kind of the same team. So we move on to the NL Central, and we're going to start with the Brewers. So I'm giving the Brewers a C, and it's kind of like a asterisk because I'm giving them a long leash. They seem to be one of those franchises that knows how to develop, I don't want to say lesser prospects, but develops their prospects, and they kind of overperform expectations. They lost Adames this year. That's going to hurt at shortstop, but they already had kind of replacements built in at shortstop, and they've kind of moved them around a little bit. They did make a trade with the Yankees. They moved on from Devin Williams, who I believe was either in the last year of his contract or had one more year. They added Cortez, so they added another arm to the starting rotation. When I look at things, I would much rather have a 3 or a 4 starter than a setup man or a closer in the bullpen anytime. You just get way more innings out of it. So, and then they also added kind of a versatile infielder in Durbin. So I don't think he's going to make the opening day roster. I think he already got sent down to AAA, but I kind of like that deal for the Brewers. The rest of it's just kind of rotating of arms, but the Brewers have kind of proven that they know how to tweak and get the best out of arms. So I'm kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I'm giving them a C. It hurts me to say this one, but I'm giving the Chicago Cubs an A. And like I said, I think I only gave out 3 A's this year. Added Kyle Tucker, which was huge. If I was the Astros, I would have just played out the season with Tucker. And, he's a Boris client. He's going to test free agency. But if you're still trying to compete, you want players like Kyle Tucker. So, Cubs traded for Kyle Tucker. They moved on from Paredes, who didn't really fit Wrigley Field with his swing. They did lose Cam Smith, which I think is a big deal. We kind of briefly mentioned him already. I think he's going to be a solid player, and he's definitely a solid prospect. But they could afford to move. Like, the Cubs have like 7 top 100 prospects, I think, still. So they could afford to move on one of their top prospects, and it still isn't really going to hurt them. And most of them are hitters too, so doesn't really hurt them that much or ding their system. They did move on from Bellinger, but he was kind of getting squeezed out of Chicago anyway. He kind of was a good player that they didn't have a spot for anymore, so that worked out for them as well. Added Presley, added Brazier, added Morgan, and basically didn't give up anything, just added some money. And as far as I'm concerned, their bullpen was one of their weaknesses last year. And I know, like, over the previous years, they kind of dinged the GM and they were just like, well, we didn't want to spend the money and we wouldn't go that extra year or whatever. So through trades, they added 3 arms to their bullpen. So I thought that was good. And their team definitely looks a lot more well rounded now. I'm giving the Cincinnati Reds a B. And it's kind of complicated, though. So the Reds have had too much infield depth for like the last couple of years. So I like their trade of moving on from India and grabbing Singer to the rotation. Now, they do have some like a good core of starters, so they didn't need Singer. I'm not sure where he's going to slide in there, but it still helped their team. Like, it's better to have more starters than second basemen. So I like that move for them. They also somehow got Gavin Lux, and I mean, they didn't really give up much for him, which to me just kind of confused me because I was like, you got rid of a second baseman and then picked up another second baseman who might platoon, might move to the outfield. Just felt like a weird addition, but regardless, they didn't really give up much for him, so I'll take it. I love the addition of Trevino behind the plate. I think he's a great game caller and everything like that. I like that. They also extended him, so I love that as well. They picked up Hayes, which I know when he was with the Phillies, he had some health issues, so I'm hoping that they can at least slide him into some type of platoon role and it'll work out for him. The biggest addition for them, though, this year was that they got Terry Francona as the manager. So to me, that's the biggest like game-changing move for them and moves it from like a C plus to a B category because I think he is great with young players and he'll get the most out of these young guys. The Pittsburgh Pirates. Again, one of the most frustrating front offices / ownerships in baseball. They didn't really do anything. They just kind of replaced pieces. It's just a rotating wheel of, again, mediocrity there. And now I'm hearing that Bubba Chandler isn't breaking camp with the team either. So I guess they're going to do the same thing with Paul Skeens where they bring him up, he dominates, and then they don't get their PPI player incentive pick. So I don't know what you're doing, Pirates, but they didn't really lose much and they didn't really add much. So they're basically the same team. All right, that leads us on to the Cardinals, and I'm giving them a D-. Now, I mentioned them earlier as to why I didn't give them an F, because they basically sat out the offseason, didn't do shit, pardon my language, didn't trade Arenado. They're trying to open up spots for the young players, but some of them are kind of already there or already blocked. Yes, they lost Goldschmidt. They lost their setup man in Kittredge, but I feel like they can replace them, especially with Goldschmidt not performing that well. They did recently, in the last couple of weeks, add Phil Maton, the reliever. He's going to be on the opening day roster, so that makes sense. The reason why they get that extra addition is because Bloom actually went out and added some like player personnel people. So they're not players, but they're personnel that's going to help the system. And since they're trying to build up their farm system and development and analytics and all that stuff, that's what gives them that extra benefit of not being an F. I think this one's pretty obvious, but the Dodgers are going to get an A+ because, I mean, how do you not? They signed the top international player in rookie Sasaki, added a Cy Young winner in Blake Snell, added 2 veteran stud bullpen arms in Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates. I mean, their 40-man roster is so freaking stacked, they basically gave away Brazier to the Cubs. Also added some depth in Kim, who I don't know if he's going to make the opening day roster at this point, but he's kind of like a middle infielder type. Oh, and then you also retain Kiki Hernandez, Teoscar Hernandez. Like, they did a great job. Like, they could afford to let Flaherty and Walker Buehler walk with, you know, the health and return of Otani to pitching. Yamamoto's going to come back. Now they got Roki Sasaki. They're stacked, and they're going to win 100 games. But their offseason was great, and they made great like contracts as well with the deferrals. Arizona Diamondbacks, so I'm giving them a B. So they did lose Christian Walker, which I think he was very solid for their team, but they did pivot pretty well and added Josh Naylor. So I think it's like the trade-off of like you're going to get added offense, but the defense is going to go down a little bit. So if you have the right pieces in the infield, you should be fine. They kind of got lucky in the fact that Corbin Burns wanted to go there because I'm sure if there was a price point, they probably weren't going to match whoever was going to be the top guy. But that gives them an amazing 1-2 punch with Zach Gallen, and it also kind of future-proofs the rotation because Gallen's on an expiring contract this year. So if he doesn't resign, well, they got Burns locked in as that ace going forward. Losing Jock Peterson does kind of hurt, but they did retain Randall Grichuk, and he can kind of somehow fit in with that platoon with Josh Naylor, so it kind of makes sense. I don't know what really happened with Jordan Montgomery, though, because all things kind of led to they're probably going to dump him. I think he is on the last year of his contract, but adding Corbin Burns, that just kind of made the rotation even more congested. So I don't know what's going to happen with Jordan Montgomery. San Diego Padres. So I'm giving them a D-. And I love their GM and Preller. Really, I feel like a lot of this comes down to all the ownership drama that was going on. With the new ownership stuff going on, I think that made players and agents kind of scratch their heads whether they wanted to go there. I think they also were shrinking payroll, so players like Profar didn't really get an honest chance to possibly resign and return there. Losing Kim, their shortstop, Higashioka, the catcher, I think he's very underrated defensively as well, and a game caller. That stuff hurts. And then losing Tanner Scott, man, especially with the Dodgers in that rotation, he was like the one guy that could get out Freddie Freeman and Ohtani. So not only did they lose him, but then he flipped over to the Dodgers. So that double hit hurt them. The only benefit that they really had this offseason was they did sign Nick Pivetta to kind of a team-friendly deal. Like this first year in the contract, I think he only makes like $1 million or $2 million. And then like year 2 and I think 3 is a option year or whatever. It is more in like the 10 mil range or something like that. So that was a nice little addition to them. But Pivetta, I also believe, had a qualifying offer. So they're going to lose a draft pick for that. The San Francisco Giants. So I'm giving them a B. They did more of a quality over quantity this year. They added a Dom's shortstop, which is a big improvement. They lost Blake Snell, but they did add Justin Verlander. So if Verlander can somewhat bounce back to at least a number 3 in the rotation, I think it'll work out well for the Giants. I feel like they had injury problems last year, and Jung Ho Lee barely is like 15 at bats above the threshold of like a rookie's or prospects distinction. So him returning in 2025 to take over center field, it's kind of like adding another free agent. So I went ahead and gave them a B because they didn't really lose that much. And then we end with Colorado Rockies because I feel like the Rockies are always in last, so it makes sense. I gave them a C just because they lost a little, they added a little, didn't really do anything, don't seem to want to compete. I mean, the only benefit to their like system, I guess, is their farm system. They tend to develop prospects, but then once they get to the majors, they don't really know what to do with them. Like, I still think the Rockies are one of the worst run franchises in sports, let alone just baseball. So gave them a C, but their franchise in general, in my mind, is a D-. That's the offseason grades that I'm giving for all MLB teams this season. So let me know what you think of them. Feel free to judge mine. But every year I go through and I make a list of all the transactions of signings, releases, trades, Rule 5 picks, that sort of thing. And as you can see over the next couple of days, you're going to hear players that sign minor league deals and then get released because they have an upward mobility contract or they're a veteran and they're allowed this. So you're going to hear a lot of roster transaction stuff over the next couple of days while teams start to solidify what their 26 man is going to be for March 27th, which is only a couple days away. So keep your ears out, listen to those transactions, and opening day will be here before you know it. So I'll see you in 2 weeks.